Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're checking out an SNK beat 'em up that would often grace the Invis machines in my area back in the day. It is an interesting brawler that doesn't come up much, but when it does, many have memories of the game's attract mode. We're looking at Mutation Nation, developed and published by SNK, released into arcades in 1992, as well as the home NEO-GEO AES systems. This is a solid beat 'em up and one of the more unique titles as this one fuses elements of SNK beat 'em up staples and just goes nuts with it. I'd almost dare say it's the Beastbusters equivalent of the SNK beat 'em ups. Hamster would port this to the PS4, Switch, and Xbox One in 2017, and that is the version we'll be looking at today. In the not-so-distant future, a scientist conducts a series of unhinged experiments before suddenly disappearing. Years later, a bioweapon is released after buildings are reconstructed over the previous lab site, turning the city's inhabitants into mutants. Ricky Jones and Johnny Hart band together to track the scientist down, while cleaning the infection with Fist of Fury. Gameplay-wise, you've got a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up in the vein of the Sengoku series, Burning Fight, and Robo Army, just to name a few. And Mutation Nation just dials it up with all that previous year's experience and releases this beast into the arcades. You'll battle through 6 stages broken up into seconds of mutant mayhem, and everything on the streets wants to body you. You get a decent bag of tricks as far as how you can pummel the opposition, and when you can figure out ways to effectively link them together, you can clap cheeks and rabbit succession while controlling the crowd. While there's only 2 buttons used, you'll have a few combos you can pull off like long strings of punches and kicks, and dive kicks and rising uppercuts. You'll also see icons labeled A through D on the ground from downed enemies, and these are your 4 charge attacks, doing huge damage when they connect. Holding the attack button charges your meter, and when released uses one of the 4 elemental attacks, or your base lightning kick, or 100 crack fist. You can also link your base chains to your rising combos, which at times can one-string body enemies, but the charge attacks do leave you vulnerable until the meter fills. The charge meter will also reset if you charge it but don't attack right away. Your charge meter also has a special attack without any lettered icons equipped, but keep in mind it depends on your health bar in that instance, and cost health to use. Enemies will be on screen in fairly decent numbers at times, and they can do a lot of damage from the grunts to the majors. Even though some of the beat 'em up techniques like wall bashing and juggling can't be pulled off here, you can still put in work by chaining your attacks in ascending order, finishing with a charge to decimate damn near everything in your path. Some enemies will launch during your standing uppercuts, but the bigger enemies won't. Here's one of the best times to run string attacks all the way through, leading to a rising upper to charge attacks, which will smoke most bosses in the game really quickly. Enemies will also swarm you, and when they're in numbers, they can deal damage astonishingly fast. Crowd control is essential here, and when enemies teleport in, it's a good window to charge your special attacks, and when timed properly, it often wipes them out as soon as they finish spawning in. Bosses will also clap you up with the quickness, especially when there's more than one of them. Getting surrounded is a death wish, so whenever possible, keep the ops to one side because they will smoke you if they encircle you. Bosses also tend to have a diagonal spot where you can hit them without them hitting you, so when you can find these sweet spots, use them to take less damage during boss encounters. Graphics wise, this is pretty sick with the SNK technology backing this wild beat 'em up. The comparison to Beastbusters I mentioned earlier mainly is with how most enemies explode into chunks of mutated viscera, and there are some grotesque looking sprites throughout the game like Robo Mantis and half human, half fish. The robots with missiles for heads are actually pretty fun ones too. While most SNK games aren't usually over the top violent, this and Beastbusters straight up go for it with the gore factor, and it's certainly a talking piece if nothing else. Sprites are also huge, taking up a fair amount of the screen and have a lot of detail alongside some solid animation. There's also a lot of sprite scaling when they enter the screen, and this is similar to how SNK's 8-man arcade game looked, which released the year prior, 1991. Sprite animations are also really fluid here, with each character having some really good movement. Characters are all over the shop with mutant abominations, and towards the end the game has some maybe not so subtle nods to HR Giger's Xenomorphs, though contextually it does make sense. You get a variety of enemies as well as locales to venture through, all with multiple sections. Backgrounds are all very well detailed down to each smashed window pane, and there's some pretty sharp looking vignettes through the game's 6 stages. While the levels do get more dynamic as you move along with some really sick looking areas, you'll see a lot of the same enemy sprites through most of the game, including bosses, some of which you will fight several times. They do introduce new enemies at a steady clip, but however once you get to that back third of the game, it starts to become a little more noticeable how much enemies are repeating without introducing new ones. Granted, characters do swap palettes. Boss fights are especially sick here with some truly wild creations looking like horror movie nods to things like Aliens, The Fly, or even Toxic Avenger at times. Bosses are all pretty huge sprites and have decent animations and attack patterns. One even just gets down to the disco lights while launching mutant flies out of their guts, so imagery can get pretty buck here in some cases. Some encounters play into the environment like crashing through the floor or battling between a convoy of moving trucks, so the encounters are mostly memorable ones here. There's also a few short cutscenes in game along with the intro and outro as the mad scientist proclaims this is your final resting place upon reaching the laboratory, and these scenes are pretty sick even if there aren't a lot of them. The ending cutscene and credit roll show your characters riding a motorcycle across the bridge away from the craters of carnage. You get a somewhat happy ending here, which doesn't always happen in early SNK games. A few of the games coming later this season will feature some of the darker final screens of SNK arcade games, but we'll get to those soon enough. Sound wise, Mutation Nation is sick sick with a dystopian yet driving soundtrack coupled with some raucous in-game audio. Papaya lays down a varied soundtrack of backing tunes do lightning kick and disintegrate your foes, all with that signature SNK sound. The various boss themes go pretty hard, all with those 90s style audio stabs when the music gets hype. Mutants all perish with a reverberated shriek fading into the background, and the hit impacts also sound pretty crunchy here. While there's no speech, there are a few sound bites for the main characters when charging and taking damage. Considering SNK developed and distributed games typically around this time had speech synthesis in several of their arcade titles, it's interesting to not see it as much here. Despite that, the audio is nice and crispy, especially when enemies explode with a sonic boom. Mutation Nation is one of those games I'd see a lot in arcades back in the day whenever a NEO-GEO machine was around. Especially for the time, it's a fairly unique beat 'em up that had some rad ideas and translated them into a ride of a game. The only real downside being the enemies and bosses start to repeat a little over halfway, but it's still a lot of fun to clap up the mutant ops until getting to that final encounter. It's challenging to get through this one with minimal damage or even 1 CC clears, but it can be done. Co-op play can open up some buck team-up attacks, and running it solo is also pretty fun. Once you figure out strategies to maximize damage, you'll be serving up that work in no time. Mutation Nation gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to beat 'em up fans and arcade game fans, since this one is an oddball SNK brawler, as well as a fun and challenging one. If your local arcade has this in their MVS system, it's worth giving it a crack or two. It's available on Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and PS4 through the arcade archives for $8, as well as the NEO-GEO AES system going for around $250 to $360 loose, and around $500 for complete copies. Arcade carts were around $200 for the MVS system at the time of this recording. It's slightly cheaper to get this on the NEO-GEO CD at around $90 for a complete copy. Otherwise, play this one however you can if you're into more obscure beat 'em ups that have a lot of the same sensibilities as the usual suspects. Learning more about how the game works opens up some gnarly possibilities, so it's got a fair bit to digest beyond its presentation. And I thank you again if you made this far into the video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you use it as a resource. Check back often where more reviews and commentaries come up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.